Do you remember these protests that were happening in Gaza 6 months ago? We've just discovered who was behind them. They were widely reported as anti-Hamas protests occurring all over Gaza, showed as evidence by mainstream media, Western media, that all of the people stood against Hamas in Gaza. By the way, very selective reporting from mainstream media. Well, we've just discovered that these protests were organized by the shadow unit of Hamas themselves. So the obvious question is, why did they organize it? Was there some sort of internal dispute? Were they protesting against, the Hamas leaders or something? That's not the case. We are now learning the details because the IOF captives in Gaza have been released back to the occupiers, and some details are emerging. These protests were organized by Hamas as a distraction. During some of the intense periods of the war, they wanted to find a way to transport these captives from one city in Gaza to another. But it was difficult to do so because IOF had occupied certain strategic areas and blocked off their tunnels. So what they did is organize these massive protests as a distraction and transport the prisoners, the captives, in broad daylight in the middle of these protests. And then they transported them from cities like Beit Lahia to Beit Hanun, right under the eyes of the Israeli reconnaissance drones. This teaches us three things. Number one is that, just from a purely analytical perspective, the level of strategic thinking behind some of the decisions that Hamas makes. This is not a group of, random raghead terrorists, however they want to paint them, right? These are people who are strategic in their thinking and have put a lot of thought behind the decisions that they make on the ground and have backups and options available to them to evade Zionist intelligence. And that brings me to the second point, which is the complete failure of the Zionist intelligence. These protests were literally performed in broad daylight. They were performed under the watchful eyes of the Zionist recon drones. They were broadcast all over the world on mainstream media. Everybody saw the footage of these protests. Yet right in the middle of them were the Zionist captives that they have spent 2 whole years trying to rescue and failed to do so. Right under their eyes. And number three, it debunks the claims made by mainstream and Western media that the people of Gaza stand against Hamas. These claims are made, and look, there are different opinions amongst people in Hamas on different things, but these protests, which were broadcast all over mainstream media, and the only time that mainstream media has given a voice to the people of Gaza, were actually staged by Hamas themselves, rather than being a genuine expression of frustration against Hamas's rule in Gaza.